By allowing the U.S. commercial launch industry to use excess ICBMs, you not only lower the tax burden, but also create potential revenue derived from the sale of these motors. Those that oppose the policy change raise legitimate concerns that allowing excess ICBMs to be used for commercial launch purposes could distort the market in the United States, undermine future investment, and delay innovations that are on the horizon. Access to foreign launch services is also a policy challenge for the United States small satellite industry. And I've heard from a number of companies that build and operate small satellites that there isn't enough capacity in the market at a price they can afford to meet their needs. India has stepped in and offered to fill, in part, this demand and is launching smaller satellites on their PSLV vehicle. The administration has provided a number of export waivers on a case-by-case basis for these launches, in part because India is becoming a strategic ally in South Asia. Unfortunately, the administration seems to lack a clear long-term policy to guide access to PSLV launches. What should U.S. policy be with regard to Indian and other foreign launch vehicles? Another factor that may impact the small satellite market is reusability. We all watch with great awe the accomplishments of Blue Origin and SpaceX.
Unfortunately, small sat users and operators are often constrained in their choice of launch options due to individual requirements, available budgets, and the unique characteristics of each option. As a result, small sat users and operators must make trade-offs between factors such as affordability, schedule, risk, and orbital placement. For example, since the primary payload customer dictates launch conditions, users and operators of small satellites launched as a secondary payload have no control on either the launch schedule or the destination orbit of the launch vehicle. And while the secondary payload customers must accommodate any delay by the primary payload, they benefit from the lower launch cost. On the other hand, small sat customers who place a premium on when the launch must occur and into what orbit the satellite needs to be placed may opt to launch using a dedicated launch vehicle despite that option's higher cost. So it is not surprising that a number of providers are seizing on this opportunity to offer additional launch options to meet existing and projected demand by small sats. Two recent proposals have been made. The first is to allow the Air Force to make its excess intercontinental ballistic missile motors available for purchase and later in use in commercial launches. The second is to facilitate U.S. commercial satellite operator access to Indian launchers. I hope that we can have an objective discussion with the panel on the pros and cons of these proposals and identify possible unintended consequences as well. Such a discussion is critical because both of these proposals are likely to require changes in statute and policy, which this committee would have jurisdiction over.
Recently, there's been some discussion about allowing U.S.-built satellites to fly on boosters, such as the Indian PSLV. This kind of discussion has taken place before in the case of allowing U.S.-built satellites to fly on Chinese boosters, which was permitted but came to an end in the late 1990s with the failure of a Long March booster and the subsequent Aspen investigation, which resulted in the ITAR changes mentioned. Since then, no U.S. satellites have flown on Chinese booster. I think the concern about using Indian boosters is not so much the transfer of sensitive technology to a nation that's a fellow democracy, but rather whether the Indian launches are subsidized by the government to a degree that other market actors would be priced out of the market. I would point to the chart that in my testimony that shows the launch rates for the past decade. India has not managed to launch more than a half a dozen times a year. They've also had some reliability challenges with their systems, and I do not see them as a clear and present danger to U.S. launchers quite yet.
CSF encourages this committee to propose any changes to the existing policy with respect to the commercial use of ICBM assets, for the reasons that I've outlined in my written testimony. CSF also opposes efforts to facilitate a government-subsidized foreign launch company, in this case India, to compete with U.S. companies. Such policy runs counter to many national priorities and undermines the work and investment that has been made by the government and industry to ensure the health of the U.S. commercial space launch industrial base. At the same time, we have to be cautious not to squeeze out the U.S. satellite manufacturers and the operators that have immediate launch needs, which cannot be served by the aforementioned U.S. commercial launch vehicles that will be coming online later this year. If it can be shown that there's no viable U.S. launch opportunities in the given time frame to a required orbit, launches on Indian vehicles should continue to be considered on a case-by-case waiver review for U.S. payloads, as been the practice for the last several years. This practice should continue while still relevant, but with the knowledge that this is definitely a temporary solution. In conclusion, on behalf of my 70-member companies, I appreciate the opportunity to testify in front of you today. American industry is responding to market demand and innovating on new technologies and outpacing any other country in the world. We seek to preserve this national leadership in space, and we look forward to working with this Congress to achieve these goals.
And the next question I wanted to ask both of you again is on the Indian launch vehicles. What are the critical factors that are leading U.S. commercial satellite operators to seek waivers to the U.S. policy on launching satellites on Indian launch vehicles?
The challenge right now is that the satellite manufacturers are making satellites at a quicker rate right now than we have the launch capability. So a satellite's not making money while it's sitting on the ground. Currently, the PSLV launch vehicle, the Indian launch vehicle, PSLV, has a sweet spot and has the capability of launching some of these satellites right now in a timely manner. We don't want to see U.S. launches going overseas by any means, whether it's to India, Russia, or whomever else. But right now, from the satellite producers and manufacturers, they need to get their assets up in the sky as quick as possible. I think this policy with the waivers and the review is a sound policy. I think it needs to be in place. I think we should stringently look at every launch that is taking place and every vehicle or every payload that we're putting up on an Indian vehicle. But I think it really needs to be evaluated. And I think, as Congressman said earlier, time will tell on this. We hope to phase this out as the new generation of launch vehicles come online. And in addition to that, a lot of these payloads that are being launched on these Indian vehicles are only one-off prototypes, because as they're being launched, they're not being launched in a dedicated orbit. They're being launched with the orbit that it's putting on. So it's mainly the prototypes of these vehicles, these payloads.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
So, I mean, I'm happy if you're telling me just let it develop on its own, that there really isn't any major need for us to do something. That's fine with me. I do want to see us not pass up the opportunity to put the ICBMs to work in some positive fashion. I guess I'm not afraid of India as being, a launch country for some of our small satellites. So I'm happy just to be hands off. But I also have a responsibility as a member of Congress to make sure that the assets of the United States are used properly and not just thrown away.
I certainly see your concern there from the taxpayer perspective, and it's greatly appreciated. But sometimes the hands-off approach also is appreciated to industry. If you see, and sometimes you need a little hand from the government and a pat on the back, but I think if you see the progress that the commercial sector has made, just in the last week alone, or last 2 weeks, what Blue Origin has done out in West Texas on proving their reusability, what SpaceX did with the commercial cargo launch, that launched not only a cargo to the International Space Station, they put in their trunk an inflatable module made by a commercial company, Bigelow Aerospace, that attached the International Space Station, that was built, the delivery system was built by Sierra Nevada from Colorado, and all the different commercial players that were involved in that, and launched from Space Florida. So there's a lot of tremendous growth going on in the commercial marketplace.
I have one last question, if I could.